Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Mind Muscle Connection podcast. Today is a Q&A episode, and I have three questions I want to dive into. But first, before I do that, I just want to go over a few ways you can help support the podcast. So first, if you found this podcast to be helpful in any way, if you could leave a rating and review, and that will help more people find this podcast. Again, I want to reach more people. So if you think this information would be helpful, please leave that rating and review, and that will help more people find this and, again, get more people to get this information. Next, I have my free masterclass on body recomp, what it is, how to do it. The link to that is in the show notes. Second, I have my free masterclass on nutrition periodization. Again, what it is, how to do it, troubleshoot any issues in each phase, go over each phase, how to set it up, common mistakes, etc. And that. And then lastly, if you haven't yet, give me a follow on Instagram, Jeff. That's where I'm most active on social media. If you ever have any questions on anything I go over, you can just shoot me a DM. So make sure you give me a follow over there. So with that out of the way, let's dive into today's question. So the first one I have is best way to bring up your non-dominant side. So I think there's two ways that I would go about this with clients in terms of how I would bring this up. So first is don't worry about it unless it's drastic. So I think too many people worry about, oh, hey, I'm off a couple reps, or hey, this side's or this side's stronger. Hey, I have this imbalance of this delt looks like this delt looks like that. And I think that they overly worry about those things and they think it's a massive deal, when at the end of the day, we have two limbs and that's just a natural thing, right? Not everyone's going to be perfectly symmetrical on each side. Things are going to be off a little bit. This is the pro of, or I guess not the pro, this is one of the side effects of having two limbs on either sides of your body. Again, I don't think they're ever going to be absolutely perfect. So again, I really wouldn't worry about it unless it's drastic. So it's really up to you in terms of what is considered drastic. I think that's very personal there on that. And so really it comes down to, okay, is this something that I want to spend a little bit extra time on that could impact my overall growth of everything? So we just have to think about it from a time constraint. Now that you have to do this, that's going to take away time that you could be focusing on progressing everything at that point. So you just have to ask yourself, is that worth the trade-off of it? Is it so drastic that's going to be something that's going to really impact me? And like I said, I think people tend to react to these things and they expect they're both sides to be absolutely perfect. Like really, this would only be like times when this could potentially be an issue. One, again, it's drastic. It's okay. You can only do, let's say you're doing single arm rows, you can only do 20 pounds on your left side, but you can do 50 pounds. Like that to me is super drastic, right? So, okay, something's going on there. We gotta work on this. But if it's like, hey, I can do single arm rows, I do 50 pounds on my left side, I do 50 pounds on my right side, but I get 12 reps on the right side and 10 on the left. Okay, is that really that big of a deal? But then also we have, if you're competing in say bodybuilding or something like that, I guess bodybuilding would really be the only one. Then again, maybe that would be something you would want to consider fixing. But this is why with posing, you can cover up those things there with that. And I guess the last thing would be injuries. However, from my understanding, people think that this is like going to be a really high risk of injury. And at the end of the day, it has to be pretty drastic for it to have any impact there. And the risk for it's a lot lower than what you'd think. Again, injury and stuff like that isn't my specialty. So I'm not like super caught up on the research there with that. So if anybody has opposing views on that, I would love to hear them. But again, from my understanding, it's the injury risk is a lot lower than what you would think in terms of any sort of like strength deficit from one side to the other side or anything like that. That's the first thing. Again, is I think people tend to over worry about these things, and it's a completely natural thing, right? There with that. Again, I think people end up spending too much time on trying to fix this, and then that's taking away from productive training that you could have to really grow everything. However, number two, the thing that I would potentially do in this situation is you could do more unilateral work where you start with the non-dominant side and have the dominant side match. So again, let's go back to, okay, let's say maybe your left side's a little bit weaker than your right side. We'll start with the left side, follow the target RAR that you have, and then just have the right side match it, even if it's not necessarily, again, maybe you get the same reps, but it's like on your left side, it's 2 RAR, on the right side, it's 4 RAR. Again, at the end of the day, I don't think that's going to make a massive difference. And if anything, it's just going to speed that process up. But at the very least, you are still maintaining and probably making some small progress on the dominant side there with that. So that would be the way that I would go about it if this is the case. Again, I think people tend to over analyze this and over worry about it when, again, this is a completely natural thing. And again, it really comes down to what's drastic to you, how much time do you want to put into it, and then you can go from there and figure out what exactly you want to do. But that's how I would go about that. All right, so my second question is, I only eat 3 times a day, but my scale isn't going down. Any recommendations on what I should do? So really this comes down to, hey, you're at a fat loss plateau. You're doing some form of trying to eat less calories, at least I'm assuming, right? And it's not working. In saying this, I think the first thing is just because you're eating 3 times a day, that isn't going to mean that you should drop weight or whatever, right? The frequency that would be the frequency at which you eat, like how frequent you eat, your meal timing, or how many meals you have per day. That is going to have a much lower impact on your ability to get into a calorie deficit compared to like how much you actually eat. Okay. So again, we can use meal timing, how many meals we eat per day, to help you eat in the amount that you want. But at the end of the day, the amount that you eat isn't going to be the thing that's, oh, hey, your body's eating 3 times a day. All right, we're automatically going to drop weight. The only way you would drop weight is if this way of eating, this 3 times a day, you're eating and moving in a way that's going to get you into a calorie deficit. So I think that's the first thing, because people will, again, with this specific question, again, yes, that's good. Again, maybe you were snacking multiple times a day and now you're just eating 3 times a day. That could be something that is going to help you get deficit. But again, if you're not really accounting for how many calories you're having in each meal, that's the big problem. And that's the thing that you need to fix versus how many meals you have per day. Again, we can rely here on the intermittent fasting research on this. And again, study after study, when it comes down to intermittent fasting, there's no benefit to intermittent fasting other than it's a way to eat less calories. And again, in order for you to see any benefits of intermittent fasting from a weight loss perspective, you need to be in a calorie deficit. So again, we can apply this to how many meals you have per day. This is also very similar to how many times a week you work out, or how many times you hit a muscle group per week. Again, that's the frequency at which you do it. And in the research, that is a much lower on the priority list than how much you do overall. Okay. Again, we can use frequency, how many times you train per week, to help you get to the amount that you need to train overall. But, and again, it's a way to help you get the volume or whatnot. But at the end of the day, how many times you train per week is far less important than how much you do overall. And again, this is the same thing with how many meals you eat per day. So again, if you're eating 3 meals a day, you're not dropping weight. Again, we need to now look at how many calories you're consuming throughout the day and or your movement. Okay. And so what I want to go into now is, if your fat loss is stalled, what's my decision-making process here with this? Okay. So number one, we're going to look at your adherence and we're going to run an energy audit. There could be something going on with your metabolism, but again, this is probably 1% chance. And again, I used to think metabolic adaptation played a big role, but really when it comes down to it, the longer we do something, that adherence can be challenging, right? Adherence is challenging from a nutrition perspective. And if you are just focusing on how many meals you eat per day, then again, you'd want to run an energy audit here to see how many calories you are actually consuming. So what does an energy audit look like? One, has movement decreased? This is where tracking your overall cardio for the week, how many steps you do, like this could be important to look at. If you're not tracking it and you look and you're like, oh crap, I was moving 8,000 steps. Now I'm just moving 6,000. Well, again, that could be something that you look at. Are you tracking things like your snacks and grazing? Are you tracking your supplements? Are you eating out a lot, right? These are going to be things that subconsciously add more calories than you think. Also, just eating more processed foods. Again, these are things that, you add foods that are more processed, it makes it easier to eat more calories than what you think, right? Just because it is very calorie dense there with that. Are your serving sizes correct? Are you tracking that? If you're not, again, that may be something that you want to look at. If you're not tracking that, I would look into that. You need to be honest with yourself here and don't skip this step. Give yourself 1 to 2 weeks of better adherence before making a change with this, right? So again, we need to make sure that we're doing this. So for example, I had a client that was seeing decent results in his fat loss phase, but for the calorie amount he was at, we thought his progress should be better. So we ran an energy audit and found out that his serving sizes were off. This was likely 100 to 200 calories per day. He wasn't logging 100-ish calories per day from supplements. And so basically after that, checked in after a week and he goes, weight loss back on track, new low of 73.51 kg this morning. The average for this week might end up 1 kg less than last week's average. So again, this just shows that by running this, like a lot of times people are overlooking these things in terms of how many calories they're eating. In this particular person's example of they're eating 3 meals a day and they're not dropping weight. Again, something's going on here. You're consuming more calories than you think, and or your movement's lower than what you think. And so we would need to look into these things here with that. And also just overall adherence. But if you're not tracking anything and you're just tracking meals, again, I would start tracking your calories. I would look into these things a little bit more and make an adjustment because you need to get your calories a little bit lower here in this example. From there, if adherence is good, then you have a few options. So decrease calories by 5 to 10%. If you have enough calories to work with and or your movement is already fairly high, then you'll want to decrease calories. Again, I would do this mostly through carbs or fats and try not to take too much away from protein in this example. So if you're this person here and you're like, I haven't really been snacking and grazing, I don't really take any supplements, I haven't really had any meals out, you're weighing your food, you know that the serving sizes are the same and it's what you need to get there. Then from here, it's, hey, you need to find ways to decrease your calories, right? So again, it could be, hey, less snacking, it could be less calorie dense foods, it could just be eating smaller amount of meals. smaller, yes, just have smaller meals for you specifically, right? So again, that would be that. Number two, it would be increased movement. Again, if you feel like you don't want to necessarily decrease your calories by very much, look at your overall movement and see where that's at. If you're sub, say, 6 to 10K steps a day, then you can potentially increase movement, and you would do that maybe by adding 1 to 2K steps per day. Or you could just do a small combination of both, right? You can make sure, hey, I'm going to eat a little bit less. I'm going to do that by making better choices. I'm going to just decrease my meal size, and I'm going to make sure I move 1 to 2K steps per day there with that. So number four is if it's stalled and you've been dropping. Now, if you haven't dropped weight at all, this probably isn't for you, but let's say you've been dropping weight, things are stalled. Again, you could do those changes. Or four, you could take a diet break, right? If you're starting to feel worn down, have extremely high hunger levels, your libido shot, you don't think a calorie decrease or movement increase is feasible, you've been trying to lose body fat for more than 12 to 16 weeks, then maybe it's time to take a diet break. The diet break can be anywhere from 1 to 2 weeks, or it can be longer depending on where exactly you're at. Again, I think for you, that for the person specifically asking this question, let's say you are just tracking your meals, you're just tracking how many times you're eating per day. I think getting a little bit more dialed in terms of how much you're actually eating and having some form of tracking that can be helpful there. This is why I do have clients track calories and macros. Again, we usually track a range of calories. We usually track protein. And then from there, I'm looking at their food log. And if this was the case, we can make these moves. But the fact that you're just tracking your meals, again, I think you need to go a little bit deeper in terms of your tracking. If you don't want to do that, I understand. But you can definitely get away without having to track your calories and macros. It's just going to make things a little bit more challenging. But again, doing these things that I talked about here are going to be key, right? So again, looking at if you're having meals out, looking at supplements, looking at your serving sizes. And again, from there, if all things check out, it's okay. Now, and you are starting to track those things, you're looking at it, then you do need to find ways to potentially eat less calories, again, like 5 to 10% less overall. So that's my fat loss troubleshooting guide there. That's how we would typically go about that. But again, I think the main thing here is just because you're eating 3 meals a day doesn't mean that's going to help you drop weight. You need to look at you need to go a little bit deeper than just how many meals you're having per day. So hopefully that was helpful. Last question of the day: if performance drops on one movement in a session, is it a big deal if all sets felt hard? So really, I took this as, hey, performance was down one day and then the rest of the day didn't feel great. Is it a big deal? So if this happens one time, I really wouldn't stress it. Sometimes this just happens, right? Like sometimes no matter what, you're just going to have these days where you just don't feel great. Again, maybe you just had a little bit more overall stress. Maybe you had more work that you had to deal with that day. So it was just one of those days, right? It just happens. So if it's one session, I wouldn't stress it. Just double check your recovery, right? Again, did you not get good sleep the last couple of days? Again, the stress part that I just talked about, maybe was nutrition off. Did you maybe eat a little bit less the day before? Did you not eat before your workout? Just double check those things. And as you start to think through it, it's, oh, I actually wasn't super hydrated. I had less to eat the day before. Stress was a little bit higher that day. I had more work that I had to do. Okay, boom. Now you know that was just part of what happened. And again, now moving forward, it's like, one, we can work on trying to limit those things. Again, if it's a nutrition, hydration thing, then you can make sure that those things don't happen again. If it's a sleep thing, you can make sure those things don't happen again. Or if it's a stress thing where just stress came up, now that in the future, if stress comes up like that, hey, it may impact and you just need to adjust accordingly to that, right? It's not anything you're doing there with that. Some other questions I would ask: are you doing too much volume compared to your recovery? Are you just doing a lot of training? Have you been doing a lot of training recently? And again, maybe your nutrition, sleep, all that stuff is off. Could your training be set up in a more effective way, right? These would just be some things I would be thinking about. Are you not taking enough rest days? Are you just doing too much volume, right? However, if it does keep happening, then you would need to look into this a little bit more and either take a lighter week, really look into your training and whatnot there. But again, one day where you just don't have a great training session, that doesn't mean that you need to just completely abandon what you're doing and take a deload week and readjust your training and everything. It's just look into it a little bit more, see, and then from there, make sure if it keeps happening, that's where you would start to really look into these things, and we would want to make a potential adjustment. I think really this is a good kind of lesson for everybody in fitness and nutrition. I think we tend to correct when something goes wrong for a very short period of time, or it was just a random thing, right? Oh, hey, I went up in weight one day. Now I need to just stop eating. I need to make all these adjustments, when really it's, hey, that's just naturally going to happen. You just need to keep doing what you're doing and things are going to trend down, right? But again, you see people overcorrect with a lot of the stuff. And I've been there in the past, so I can totally relate and understand the thought process behind it. But again, I think we need to take a step back. And again, if things happen just once or every once in a while, it's not a big deal. If it starts happening more regularly, more often, that's when we need to look into it and potentially make a adjustment there with that. So that is it for this episode. I hope this was helpful. Again, if you have any questions on this, just follow me on Instagram, shoot me a DM. I'm always a DM away. If you are somebody that maybe you're performance hasn't been great, or maybe, yeah, you just wonder like why it is. Maybe you need to get on a better training program. Maybe your fat loss has stalled and you're not sure how to make an adjustment. There's that. Then my free 30-minute strategy calls for you. We dive into these things, any issues you're having, we go over, we help set a game plan moving forward and make sure that you're on the right track moving forward. So if you're interested in that, the link to that is in the show notes. But that's it for this episode. I'll chat with you next time.